This is a meeting of the City Council Ordinance Committee. We do have a quorum. To my far right, I have Councilor Nicastro. To my right, I have Councilor Thompson. To my left, I have Councilor-at-Large David Texera. And to his left, we have Councilor Jack Lally. I'd like to welcome everyone who is either watching or here. And with that, Madam Clerk, would you read the item number 1?
Item number 1, ordinance. An ordinance prohibiting camping on public property, to create an ordinance to prohibit camping on public property and to provide for removal of campsites on public property. Invited to attend, Jeffrey Thompson, Ward 5 Councilor, Mayor Robert Sullivan or his designee, Megan Bridges, City Solicitor or her designee, Jasmine Bradshair, Director of Social Services, Brian Nardelli, Fire Chief or his designee, Brenda Perez, Police Chief or her designee, George DePina, Chief of Inspectional Services, Patrick Hale, DPW Commissioner, James Cliff, Commissioner of Buildings.
Councilors, the mayor contacted me, and he is at a medical appointment with one of his children, and Attorney Verdi from the Law Department will be here. And just before I turn to Councilor Thompson, who filed this, Madam Clerk, would you, for the benefit of people who are listening, just give a general overview of what this ordinance is about, and we can get into specifics? As non-legalese as possible, please.
Yep, so this is an ordinance that was crafted after the Supreme Court's decision in Grant versus Pass. That decision addressed the issue of a ordinance on the West Coast, I think it was in Seattle, and that had some prohibitions on camping in public properties. The Supreme Court said that the municipality could legislate on that issue, and it was not determined to be cruel and unusual punishment, which had been the prior federal precedent. So the draft ordinance that's before you includes a section on definitions, which is basically just to identify the certain items that are being discussed in the ordinance, as like what public property is, what posted notice is. Provides that no person may sleep on public property at any time, prohibits camping, identifies the procedure for removal of public property of the campsites, which breaks it down into kind of 2 categories. Category 1 being immediate removal, which has certain instances where immediate removal can occur without the need for any sort of notice. And then the second group being removal with 24-hour notice. And that is where the city would provide a notice that says you need to remove your campsite, and if you don't, after 24 hours, it will be discarded. And then talks about the process for the removal of the campsite, the process for posting the notice, and penalties for violations.
Thank you. And councilors, the reason we have so many invited guests is that this is a complex social policy issue, and I wanted to have as many people here who would be actively involved in any ordinance available to answer questions. So with that, Councilor Thompson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, members of the Ordinance Committee. I'm Jeff Thompson, Ward 5 City Councilor, and I'll be presenting the ordinance prohibiting camping on public property. So as stated in June, in a long-awaited Supreme Court ruling, the Supreme Court, in its Grants Pass decision, empowered municipalities to take control of their public spaces. The ordinance before you does just that. In collaboration with the Mayor's Office, Social Services, the City Solicitor's Office, Brockton Police Department, Brockton Fire Department, the Inspectional Services Department, the District Attorney's Office, and Legislative Council, we drafted an ordinance that is clear, it's workable, and it's enforceable. The ordinance identifies 2 separate circumstances. One is an immediate hazard, which is subject to an immediate removal. And that hazard is an encampment that obstructs a public way, a sidewalk, a parking lot, an alleyway, under our bridges, or on park benches. Any encampment that obstructs these areas are subject to an immediate removal. And then we have different encampments that are not an immediate hazard, and they are subject to a 24-hour notice. And those are encampments in a public park or other public property. Now, as with any ordinance, there requires enforceability of the ordinance, and this ordinance does have an enforceable component, which includes the first offense is a written warning. Any second offense is a $200 fine. And any third or subsequent offense, Brockton PD or the city may issue a criminal complaint. Now, the city will also provide a translated version of the 24-hour notice and of this ordinance when it is requested. The Social Services Department will still be present at the removal of any encampment and offer any appropriate resource to those affected by this ordinance. And the city will continue to treat our unhoused population with compassion and respect. Now, I acknowledge there's opposition to this ordinance. I have read the letters and statements submitted to this committee, and I appreciate alternative voices in advocacy for the unhoused population. But this ordinance is not anti-homeless. It is pro-public safety. It does not target people, it targets behavior. Now, our downtown residents, school kids, business owners, and their patrons are afraid to walk by homeless encampments, especially if that encampment is occupied by an intoxicated or mentally ill person. They are afraid to walk by encampments that is littered with trash, needles, or feces. And cities across the country, including San Francisco, are enacting ordinances to deal with unlawful encampments. And Brockton must act as well. It is the #1 duty of city government to provide a clean, safe environment for our residents and our business owners to flourish. And this ordinance will be just one tool in the city's toolbox to accomplish this goal. And so I ask that this committee vote in favorably of this ordinance so that we can continue the necessary work to provide a clean and safe environment for the residents of our city. Thank you. And with that, I will, if there's any direct questions, or we can bring invited guests along, or however.
You remain there, and councilors, whoever seeks recognition, you may ask to have any one of the invited guests provide information. So let me know who seeks recognition.
Thank you.
Councilor Castro.
I would ask Jasmine Bratcher to come up. She is a social worker with a master's in social work, working in the mayor's office.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
Give us your comments on this proposed ordinance and what you tell me it was supposed to look like.
Okay. All of the departments that were mentioned worked together on creating this ordinance. A very heavy push that the mayor's office had was to make sure that the approach we were taking was going to be compassionate and still treat people as human beings. There's a large portion of my concerns that are not in this final draft, which was what was going to happen in a time of no shelter. And that would be when there are no shelter beds available. So Mainspring at this point in time is averaging 185 people a night already. By winter, they will have to have a hard cap for safety purposes of anywhere from 200 to 210 people. We definitely have more people than that between the people in shelter and then the people outside. I'd say we have close to 100 people outside on top of who's in shelter now. So it's closer, I'd say, probably to high 200s, maybe 300. There are definitely people we don't account for. My concern is, while there are ways, I think, to definitely change this and make it work for the purposes that we need it for to address the health and safety concerns, I'm still very concerned for the people that are going to be outside, what options we're going to be able to provide for them because we don't have enough shelter beds. And that's a state funding concern that we also have to address, and that's something that our office has been working on with the state delegation. But these are people. We have to treat them like people. It can't just be a matter of moving them along with no real consideration, because I am not necessarily the person that should be deciding if something is a public health and safety concern. I could definitely point them out, but I'm not the top person that should be doing that. I can definitely provide the services to people, work with them on housing, do all those things, work with them during a removal to ensure that, their mental health status is where it needs to be, that we're working with them to relocate, posting the notices. We take pictures of the notice. We keep track of all that: location, date, time. And so far, people have been very cooperative as far as moving and relocating, but we're going to get to a point where there's nowhere for them to relocate to. So I think it's going to be very important for us to consider that, because we don't have somewhere for them to go. A lot of these people can't enter shelter and won't be able to once we hit the capacity for how many people will be let in.
So Jasmine, is the answer to just let them stay on the street?
I don't think it is. I think we have always needed more shelter beds than we have. We don't necessarily get the funding for it, but I think now would be a really good time to start looking back on some of the ideas that have been brought up at past council meetings or in just past conversations, and start seeing if those are things we can act on now before it gets too cold. I know driving here, I was a little uncomfortable having my window down, so if I'm cold, I'm sure someone sleeping outside all night is. Some of the ideas we've been throwing around are using funds from the opioid settlement abatement to open a day center, but that only addresses things for during the day. It would give people a place to stay during the day, during the winter, to work on services, to be meeting with mental health professionals, physical health professionals, all the different agencies that we have in the city. But I think there's also ways to possibly use something like that as a warming center in the evenings, where we won't have the capacity to do so at the shelter this year. And this is going to be something really important to be looking forward to in the coming years, because the situation isn't changing. If anything, things are going to get more expensive, and the times are going to get harder for people. We're going to see more people out on the street. And I think having these conversations now, we probably should have already started them, but now's a good time, if nothing else, to at least start really having them, including all of the key players that we're going to need.
It's a very difficult issue. We have a library, a main library, a Carnegie Library, that I'm told most members of the public don't want to go into because of the experience of the unhoused urinating on the floor, making the place not smell good. And it's a public library. They cannot be turned away unless they don't behave properly. We do want compassion, and we do want to treat them as human beings, because they are. But we have terrible situation here. We've spent millions of dollars, secured millions of dollars in grants to turn the downtown area into a viable downtown district. We're spending money right now in studying to do the same thing in the Campello area to the south and the Montello area to the north. And you know about all of the instances of impacts from the housing in these areas, especially in Campello. I speak to you about them often. I don't expect you to have the answer. I read the letters that we received from the nonprofits operating here in the city, and you're absolutely right. We need a global answer to this global problem. But that's not what the city is tasked with. That's beyond us. If you need us to go to Boston to advocate for that, if you need us to go to Washington, I'm willing to go. It's a problem affecting all it's a problem affecting all our cities, and probably affecting our towns to much less of an extent. Jasmine and I had a conversation recently about, there are 7 communities, I believe, that abut Brockton. How many of them have a shelter? None. And yet we know from your talking with some of the people living outdoors in Brockton, some of them are from these towns. and they come here for services. It's just very troubling.
Yeah, so Mainspring is funded by the state to provide shelter services to, I think it's 12 other communities, because those places do not have their own shelter systems. Plymouth will have a shelter system in the winter, but it's very temporary and it's not at the same capacity. They don't have the same types of services. It's more just you can sleep here type of thing. Taunton has a very small shelter, the Good Samaritan House, and that I'm not even sure if it's still functioning as a shelter, but the other places do not. So they split them up between Father Bill's Place and Mainspring so that those other cities and towns can have locations to receive services. Boston has its own, and then Fall River and New Bedford are kind of their own area as well. So we do take a very large portion of whoever is experiencing homelessness in this general area, because this is where they're referred to go to. And some places have had to start turning people away because they're already at capacity.
And it's only October.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to call up Lieutenant Schliemann. Good evening. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you for all the help you give me in Ward 4, and I'm sure all of the wards. I'd like your thoughts on this ordinance, and I'd like your thoughts on the situation.
Yeah, so the situation's troubling. The ordinance is clearly needed. The problem is large, and I think it's something we can put to good use and improve the quality of life of the citizens of Brockton.
Will the police have the capacity to enforce this ordinance?
It's going to take a group effort between the different city agencies, but my understanding is we're all on the same page and we're going to get the job done.
And what about the idea that, 3 strikes you're out and you're incarcerated?
I don't.
Isn't that just criminalizing not having a place to live?
So we're working with the Brockton District Court right now on a community court. We're going to meet with them again next week. So the idea is not to incarcerate people, it's to get them in. The idea is to have case managers to help people get connected to the resources. So it's just a little leverage, if you will. The goal is not to give people a place to live that turns out to be the county jail. That's not the end goal at all.
And should this all be headquartered in Brockton?
The program or the shelter? I'm sure. No.
The requirement, the necessity to shelter people, should Brockton be the one that has to do this?
I don't think that's for me to say. It's here, and we're going to deal with it.
It is. I've heard stories of homeless people found in Wareham being driven to Brockton. I've heard stories of people incarcerated in Bridgewater, at Bridgewater State, being driven to the train station with enough fare to get to Brockton. I mean, it just seems like this region wants to dump all these people on us. And part of it is we have services here. I get that. But it's a terrible burden on your department and the other departments of the city.
And the problem, as you know, is not exclusive to us. I've had a lot of conversations with my counterparts in Boston, and they expressed that 75% of the people that end up in Boston aren't from Boston. They're from other communities. And it does turn out to be a transient population. They do go from place to place, and they do end up at the place where the services are. And we're fortunate to have services here, to have places to refer people to.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
At this time, that's all I have.
Anyone else? Go ahead then. The chair will wait.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one for Councilor Thompson. So, Councilor, my understanding of this is another tool in the toolbox of the police department and our, emergency services personnel. This isn't a blanket law that just, hits everybody every day. This just gives them another, another avenue in responding to issues.
Correct. So this is an ordinance that will allow our police department and other departments, including our Inspectional Services Department and even the Fire Department to identify encampments that pose a hazard and to remove those that pose that hazard. I don't believe this is an ordinance that we're looking to sweep all homeless people out of our city. I don't think we have the ability to do that or the desire to do that. This is really targeting the immediate hazard that's created by people sleeping on our public ways, under our bridges, on our sidewalks, in alleyways, places that people try to traverse, where they try to conduct business. And so this is an opportunity for us to remove those encampments. I trust the Brockton Police Department to use their discretion to focus on the areas that are, that have that a homeless person sleeping has a large impact. The unhoused population will be treated with respect, as they have been over the past, decade, as when the city of Brockton responds to homeless encampments. And Lieutenant Schliemann brought up a good point about the community court. I actually had a conversation with one of the assistant district attorneys today regarding that community court. And so that will be established to provide more of a diversionary program, that if anybody who is where a criminal complaint is issued in this matter, and they are arraigned on that criminal complaint, there's a community court available to address the situation. We have no desire to have a long-term criminal impact on any of the people who are cited under this ordinance. What we want to do is be able to get them into a program where we can provide them treatment and they can seek alternatives than sleeping on our streets. And so that's what this ordinance looks to do. It's to assist, and I hope it's passed favorably so that we can, so that this can be on the books to assist our Brockton Police Department.
And so there was some concerns brought up about maybe a draft stage of the ordinance in the finished product. What do you feel, if anything, needs to be done to bridge the gap and cover those concerns?
Well, to be honest, I believe the ordinance has bridged a lot of those gaps. Now, I'm sure everybody at the table is not fully satisfied with the ordinance before you. I believe it took the best ideas from all of the proposed ordinances and put them under one ordinance. I think the idea of identifying different circumstances, as I said, an immediate hazard requires an immediate removal. People who are not causing an immediate obstruction to a public way, somebody who's maybe off in the woods, then I trust the Brockton Police Department and our Fire Department, Inspectional Services, to make a decision as to whether that's an encampment that requires immediate removal or 24-hour notice removal, or maybe we leave them there because it's not creating a hazard. But we have to differentiate between the encampments that are not immediate hazards and those that are, and I believe this ordinance does that.
Oh, fair enough. I have a question for Attorney Verdi. Thank you, Counselor. Good evening.
Good evening.
My question, very refined, very elegant. Is it legal? Can we do this?
Yes.
Okay.
The short answer is yes, to an extent. It's going to come down to enforcement. The Grants Pass case really dealt with the Eighth Amendment, and the decision itself narrows it to these anti-camping ordinances do not violate the Eighth Amendment. The court specifically left it open whether there are other possible constitutional violations. Due process is definitely a big one, which is why notice is provided in this. So I'm thinking that the notice part of it will prevent claims for due process.
And that covers, okay. I know that, I believe it was Fall River got in some trouble to the south of us, and that was panhandling. But that was, I think, the overzealous enforcement aspect of it.
So actually, Fall River just recently
Yeah.
passed an anti-camping
Oh, good. Yeah.
ordinance, which I do have a copy of if you would like to see it. And it's pretty short and sweet. I do have some issues with it because I think it is left open as far as due process claims. There is no notice provided in this ordinance, but there is no criminal aspect to it either.
Okay.
So,
So, all right, that's something to think about. Counselor, did you?
If I could just add one thing to that. Thank you, Attorney. On the notice issue, this ordinance also specifies posted notice.
Right.
And so the city of Brockton will determine certain areas throughout our city that may attract more encampments than other areas, and that we would post notice of this ordinance and the unlawfulness to encamp in that area. And so, as Attorney Verdi stated, that notice is an essential aspect of due process, and this ordinance provides both a 24-hour notice and posted notice. So I believe that covers our requirements.
Yep.
Thank you.
And the rest of it is okay as long as we don't enforce overzealously?
Well, so, I mean, overzealous is subjective.
Yes.
This does provide for 3 violations. That's the only time a criminal complaint would be issued. And again, that's going to, this is not shall, right? There's no shall language in which that criminal complaint must issue.
Right.
This is may. And so we'll leave it within the discretion of our Brockton Police Department to determine which people are multiple offenders with no regard to our ordinances, and those who are just, maybe
Need a break.
need a break.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you. And I do want to echo Councilor Nicastro's concerns. I have constituents calling. They see, I've had a call where they saw a Hingham police cruiser dropping somebody off.
Yeah.
So, I understand the way the infrastructure is laid out and where the shelters are. I definitely think it's, lucky Plymouth in being in the situation they're in, a little convenient. And I know that places like Boston are moving people all over the state, not just to Brockton. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's fair to the city. I don't think it's fair to these people. I think that a small community with one person who becomes homeless can help that one person. I think it's a lot of times proportional, and if we took care of the people in our community, this wouldn't be such an issue. I think what's winding up happening is you have a lot of people who, instead of helping their neighbor, they prefer the out of sight, out of mind tactic, and they just make it go away. And then it has to go somewhere. It comes here, and then those same people who made it go away go to their 6-figure jobs in the city in a nonprofit and tell us that we're not being very nice. So I think this is this really is like the council said, a global issue. I think it's something that relies on people being better people. But, in the spirit of playing it where it lies, we have to do the work to represent the folks that we represent. And we weren't hired to accept lying down the city developing any kind of position as, oh, you could just put them in Brockton. So some kind of balance, a may ordinance, not a shall ordinance, that gives us the ability to respond without making it, inflexible, unjust, or mandatory, I think is a good step forward.
And
Thank you,
I
Mr.
also want to
Chair.
remind that this is essentially a public safety ordinance, and
Yeah.
to that effect, we do have our fire chief here who helped, whose input was very, very appreciated and sobering when drafting this ordinance. So I would ask if Fire Chief Nardelli, if you could come forward and maybe speak to, for your perspective on the ordinance. Thank you.
Good evening, councilors.
By the way, I have no objection to that, but hopefully the chair will run the meeting and we'll call up people in due order. I had questions for Lieutenant Schleiman and Attorney Verdi, but I'll get to them in a minute. Go ahead, Chief.
Okay. Good evening. How is everyone? So this is obviously a difficult subject for everyone involved. Last year, about this time, we had an incident, well, a few incidents behind the old Corcoran building that there were fires going up the backside of the building by some of these encampments. At that point is when I really, outside of the medical calls, we had been really tasked with a lot of these encampments. This is when it became concerning to me. Later in the winter, we started to develop more fires underneath the bridges, became very concerning. In the last 2 years, going through our inventory of calls, we've responded over 400 times to encampments throughout the city, not just the ones we speak of tonight, the bridges and, like I just said, the Corcoran building. Over 400 responses, 419 in total, 368 of them for medical calls, 32 of them for fire incidents. To Councilor Thompson's point, I think it's important to recognize that we have not had a fire death in the city of Brockton in the last 4 years. That's, again, due to aggressive fire prevention, great fire attack staffing that we've been blessed with over the last number of years. But in the last 2 decades, 75% of those fire deaths we have had in the city have been due to homeless encampments. I can read them off, and you may remember some of them, because some of them were publicized. But those encampments, 2 adults from carbon monoxide exposure at the old Bargainier site, 1 adult with thermal burns at the rear Maple Alleys on Crescent Street, 1 adult thermal burns in the park, Crescent and Summer Street, and 1 adult thermal burns behind the Shaw's Supermarket backside near Torrey Street. That's a concern, obviously, for the occupants that are making up these encampments. And again, I know the mayor has said it a number of times, his job is to be the mayor for everyone in the city, including the population that we discussed tonight in the encampments that they're in. Obviously, 75% of those deaths in the last 2 decades is an outlandish number for any fire deaths we've had in the city. Outside of just that, there are some structural concerns with fires. And again, I talk about this a lot when I come before the full council, is my job's obviously the fire chief to obviously we're put in charge of saving lives. But one of the biggest things you look at when you look at the definition of a fire chief here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts through the credentialing process is to reduce the happenstance of conflagration. I'll use the Corcoran building as a perfect example. A lot of times folks are getting into that building, the windows, the doors are knocked out. Public Properties has done an incredible job of trying to get up there to have it taken care of when it's noticed. But a fire spread through a building like that is extremely dangerous. If you think back to 1999 in the Worcester Cold Storage building, and we lost 6 Worcester firefighters. Not to mention the potential, obviously, of anyone that might be living in that building. We have a number of buildings along those tracks now. We've found a lot of encampments that are, if you go up to North Montello Street, the old Grossman's building, there are a number of areas that we have to be deeply concerned about with that. The fires under the bridges concern me, and I've talked to the mayor, I've talked to Councilor Verdi about this. Those bridges are granite. Those granite bridges are held in place, though, by concrete. Concrete has the effect of doing a phenomenon, what's called spalling, when it loses its moisture. You see it in building fires quite often. Fires under those bridges creating spalling would actually create a major problem with the stability of that bridge. I've spoken, we're meeting with a man from the MBTA on a regular basis when we were trying to put a lot of this stuff together. And I had spoken to him in depth, and he had talked to their engineering department, and they were like, yes, absolutely, there's no question. Where they went with that is beyond what I have knowledge of. But that spalling condition could not only create a hazard to the drivers below, but it can also create a hazard to the people above in those, whether commuter rails during the day, or even a bigger situation, those rails are owned by CSX. They move freight, they move, for lack thereof a better term, ethyl bad stuff up and down those lines, from Providence to Worcester to Boston to everywhere. Every night, any night, 3 a.m., you leave one of the firehouses and go on a call, there'll be a train sitting up on one of those bridges as they're moving it through slowly. That could create even a bigger hazard to the downtown area. Again, these are all potentials, but again, as your fire chief, my job is to look at potentials, not just the here and now. So I was honored to be part of assisting with the drafting of this document and this ordinance change. I think, this is a global problem. This isn't, obviously, like everyone said, this isn't just a Brockton problem. I think, to Councilor Thompson's point and what he's been talking about, the public safety component of this is extremely valid, and those are my biggest concerns.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Chair. I got a question for Jasmine. How are we doing, Jasmine?
Good, how are you?
Doing well. You said we got approximately about 300.
Or so. It depends. We have people that kind of bounce back and forth, a lot of hospitalization, stuff like that. I have a running list of the people I can get information from outside. It's not necessarily full names, but it's more like statistical information so that we have it. I have at least 102, I believe was the number when I checked before I left this afternoon, different individuals that are identified as mostly sleeping outside right now. So that's not the people in shelter.
So approximately how many people that we have at the shelter that take shelter? You have an idea out of 300?
That are in the shelter?
Yeah,
So on any given night right now, they're saying about 185.
about 185. So we got about 100.
And that fluctuates.
Yeah, about 100 plus outside that sleeps outside. Because, we got the kids that walks from school, from home to school. And when they see those, not against homeless, and I know a few that's turned to be homeless, but it's about the safety.
Yes.
I don't want to see my kids walking on on the School Street Bridge or Crescent Street or even Center Street Bridge and see homeless shooting and see the needles on the ground, and who knows, they might step on it. And it comes down about the safety. Again, we want to do what's right for the city. We want to help anybody that comes into the city and do right by the city, but at the same time, they got to play by the rules also, because we got to invest that's literally afraid to come here to invest because the problem that we have. And it's just not right.
So without this ordinance already, myself and Inspectional Services, George DePina's here, we have successfully relocated 29 tents just within the last couple months. I have addressed over 47 needle removal calls, and we get about 15 or so every week. And I have housed 5 people outside of the city. So there are ways to, I would say, go off of this draft and make this work. But I do have concerns for some of the stuff that's on the draft, just because the criminalization part, unless someone's doing something illegal, then I'm fully for, you carry that out how you need to. But we have people whose mental health prevents them from moving along, and I can't house somebody fast enough for them to stop showing up in the same place. So if we end up criminalizing them because of that, and I have had, unfortunately, people that show up for calls for us from the police department that are not on the same page all the time, so we get a different response depending upon who we get. And the discretion part is a concern for me, how we're going to handle that, because if it's someone's discretion, one person might handle something a little differently versus another person. So I think it'd be better to have a very set, clear idea. If we're going to have that type of standard in the ordinance, it needs to be set for everybody. It needs to be the same, but it also needs to be understanding of some of those things. But I also do believe there needs to be a level of enforcement, because I go and talk to these people every day, and it's at the point now where I used to work at Mainspring, and I felt perfectly safe walking around alone, doing my outreach, doing whatever. I don't have that luxury anymore. I don't feel safe being by myself. I can't go into the woods and talk to someone at a campsite and assume I'm going to come out safely. And I've lucked out that I have a lot of people that have my back, that come with me, that are supportive and show up for us. But I get that. Kids are walking. We've had people report that they're harassing their children. They're throwing things at them. People's car windows are being hit. They're pressing the walk buttons to stop traffic, and then people aren't comfortable. I just think there needs to be a little bit more discussion of how to make this the most effective it's going to be for what's going on. Like for your property, for instance, you have people that cut through it. You have people leaving needles, leaving trash. And I'm constantly calling Brewster, asking them to come clean them up. And it's just not keeping up with the demand that we have. So I think there needs to be a lot of things in place in addition to support this. But I think this could be helpful and very effective if we can shift some of what's happening here a little bit to be effective and be productive. But I did just want to point some of that out. There are things changing. I take photos. We're keeping track of that stuff. And it doesn't always look like it, but there's a lot of areas that already look a lot better. And it's a lot of just having to go back down and clean up the trash that remains after sites are relocated. Oh, and the MBTA also put up no trespassing signs for us underneath the bridges, saying that MBTA police would start patrolling. We also had a meeting with them asking if they could enforce that at the stations as well as under the bridges every so often. And we have noticed that they're staying clear a lot longer, and they have also remained cleaner a lot longer.
And I know we got some homeless that has a language barrier. And how's that going to affect?
So Courtney Henderson, our Director of Immigration Affairs, has already started working with me on translating all of the resource packets that we provide that have every single housing option, like all the different resources I would give just talking to people. So we'll have that, and I think it's 5 languages. And then we will also translate all of the posted notices as well as the notices that we'll be giving to people into whatever language we believe they need. And then if it's a language outside of those 5 most common that we tend to see, the school department has a department that helps with translation for extended languages, and they've told us that they're willing to help us translate in those instances.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Lally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, before you sit back down, on the subject of the work you're doing, I do have to express my appreciation. I fortunately haven't had to call too often, but you've been, really responsive to help people out, when they find themselves in, an unfortunate situation. So I appreciate that. That is something, just as a side note, that, I get a lot of calls about people at intersections pushing the walk button and, using that as a, more time to solicit vehicles as they go by. But I just wanted to, and I know this came up in your initial statement, but just to break it down, the ordinance in front of us is here. You'd like it a little bit over here. What are, if you have them broken down, what are the exact sort of points points of difference that you have?
So we had included a portion of what would happen of a time of unshelter, or time of no shelter, which would mean that when we run out of shelter beds, we couldn't penalize people for having to sleep outside because we don't have somewhere to put them, and being a right to shelter state, I don't really think we can penalize them for being outside at that point because they don't have somewhere to go. And that part's missing, and that was very important for me to have in here, just to make that clear to people, like, we see that you have nowhere to go. I know I can't provide it for you. I can't provide you housing right away. And I think it would be important to have that there, just kind of as an assurance for people to know that we have considered that. We are being as empathetic as possible. We're being compassionate, because we're going to hit that point very soon, I would say within the next couple weeks. And we get that question all the time. People are like, well, where can I go? Where can I camp? And I'm calling shelters. No one's willing to take people. No one has space to take people. People can't afford to go to actual campsites, and a lot of them require them to have a camper if they're going to. And they can't afford that. And then we have the issue with family shelter, where we're going to also start seeing families outside soon, I have a feeling. We've gotten a call for one. Luckily, we were able to divert them immediately to family shelter, and DTA was able to place them. But we're also running low on family shelter locations. And I've had conversations with people I know that work at DCF, and they're trying to be understanding of that. When you have nowhere to bring your child, it's not necessarily neglect or anything, you have nowhere. So they're being understanding, they're working around those types of reports that they're getting. But do you then criminalize a mother for having her children outside because she has nowhere to bring them? Or because they get denied from family shelter because maybe they make $5,000 too much. So there's a lot that just, I feel like this kind of alienates people in a sense, and it could be a lot more inclusive with those small changes. I'm not asking for big changes, just small things that are gonna cover people in those times of need, especially where I see this situation getting worse before it gets better.
So it's mostly just specifications as to, you know, hard lines where you can't criminalize?
Yes.
Okay, and so for the unsheltered, you know, the people in that sort of first category, what do we do now?
So those are the types of conversations that we've already started having with our state representatives. What options we have for small-term goals that we can meet as well as long-term goals. And they've started having those conversations, trying to get additional money for the shelter here. The problem we're going to have is they're still only funding so many shelter beds. So it's a matter of, do we then meet with other cities and towns to be like, hey, what does it look like if you were to open your own shelter space, even if it's just at night, just like a gym somewhere where people can sleep? And those are some of the ideas that we've been bouncing off of people. Or is it having warming shelters that are designated just to housing people overnight so that we have somewhere to put people, knowing the state has designated us as one of the locations that's going to be taking in a lot of the unhoused because of the way funding split up. I just need people with bigger voices to help me with those conversations that are going to have a little bit more pull when we're discussing that. But then it's also like short-term stuff to address some of the concerns, because a lot of times it's people pointing out small things like, there's needles everywhere. I'm like, okay, I have a list of agencies you can call that are willing to pick them up. I'll go pick them up. Like, I'm trained to do that. I can do that. Public restrooms is a big one. I still think we should have that conversation. We're a large city. Most places that have any type of tourist attraction have a public restroom of some sort. And it would also mitigate a lot of the concerns we have with the biological contaminants that show up underneath the bridges. Winter comes, and in addition to people just needing a restroom, people get food poisoning, they get norovirus, and it would eliminate some of that contamination and that exposure that people have. But they're small things that all will eventually lead up to addressing this problem better and making sure we're taking care of our residents better. And that includes everyone, not just, you know, our taxpayers, but also the people that at this point are sleeping outside and can't pay taxes, so.
Right. Okay. All right, yeah, I think that, I get it. I think that with the flexibility afforded the police department, I think that it's, you know, specifying no criminal penalties is, I think, less of a legal issue, more of a peace of mind issue. And the way I look at it through your testimony and the counselor's testimony. But that's what I've got. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair.
All right, if that, okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Jasmine. Someone who knows has informed me that if an unhoused person has a criminal offense against them, they cannot obtain housing.
No, so if they have an open case, any housing through Mainspring specifically, they cannot house them till it's closed. And then if it's, depending upon what the charges are that they have on their quarry, they can't house them. So things like obviously murder, arson, really high levels of distribution within a certain time frame, they wouldn't be able to house them. So and that's just funding qualifications through federal funding that require that. And then their program has to stick to that in order to keep funding. Brockton Housing is a little bit more lenient, but again, those types of charges, sexual offenses, like all those types of things stop people from getting housed. But open cases do as well, and it could be a simple open case like shoplifting is going to stop somebody from getting housed. And they can be pretty extensive because the cases can get drawn out for a really long period of time. And then we can't seal a quarry depending upon what the cases are for a certain set period of time. So adding charges on makes housing people much more difficult. I did speak to the people from the community court program that's going to be opening, and I think the community court is going to be a great way to avoid some of those concerns by not really having it on a criminal component, but requiring people to seek treatment in that sense. I do see a lot of the people that we're dealing with not complying with that, so it's going to turn into criminal complaints. And obviously that is a personal choice. If they choose not to do those things, there's nothing we can do to force them. But for the people that maybe aren't necessarily mentally capable of making good choices on their own right now, I do see this being a little bit of a hindrance in that sense, so.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm just going to have some questions for Lieutenant Schleiman and for Attorney Verdi. And I think I'll start with Assistant Solicitor Verdi first. You said that notice is very, very important because of due process. If I'm reading this ordinance correctly, that notice only applies to removal of a campsite on public property, because under Section 3, it says no person may sleep on public property at any time, no person may sleep in any pedestrian or vehicular entrance to public or private property abutting a public sidewalk. So I take it the police can come along, and if somebody is sleeping on public property, they don't have a campsite, they don't have a tent, they don't have anything set up, we don't have to worry about notice there. They can take action?
Right, well, it depends what action.
Well,
In that situation, if they're just saying you can't be here, then I don't see any violation.
Who was the person? I mean, you wouldn't walk away and leave them there.
Right, but that's what I'm saying is what kind of removal? Really, it comes into play a lot with the personal property. If it's just the person that is there and is not allowed to be there because there's a no trespassing sign posted, that's part of the notice that Councilor Thompson was talking about, is those signs give that notice. You can't be here legally. You can't sleep here legally. So if those notices are posted where they're not allowed to camp, then that's the notice.
Well, I'm talking about someone who sleeps on the steps at City Hall, right out here. And, I mean, forgive me for being so specific, but we're passing an ordinance that needs to be enforced. Otherwise, it really is meaningless. I think we passed an ordinance, and councilors, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't we pass an ordinance that you can't be out on the street soliciting money and creating a public safety hazard?
Panhandling, yes.
Every single time I come down to a meeting here, including tonight, there is someone in the middle of the road at Crescent and Montello Street soliciting money.
We rescinded it.
No, that's the roadway safety ordinance.
Roadway safety ordinance.
It's enforceable, it just has to be enforced.
Right. So, and one of my questions to the lieutenant is going to be, since that ordinance was passed, have we ever prosecuted anyone? And I don't think we have. So an ordinance that's not being used is really a meaningless ordinance. But the way this is written, Attorney Verdi, and I'm not trying to create tension between you and me, but it simply says no person may sleep on public property at any time. But there is nothing that indicates you have to give a person who is sleeping on public property at any time advance notice. So if I'm a police officer and I know this ordinance exists, I'm going to come along and I'm going to say, you can't sleep on the steps at City Hall, you've got to leave.
Well, because you have to read it along with the penalty for violations section,
Yeah?
which says any person who violates any of the provisions of this ordinance shall be given a written warning. So that's kind of step one, is for the person who is violating the ordinance by sleeping where they're not supposed to be, that's
And fortunately, you jumped ahead to where I was going to go. Who's going to do the record keeping? Any of the invited guests here, just step up. Jasmine goes out and she finds, I think, 10 people that are camped out at DW Field Park. And unless she has a police officer with her to ask, I need your identification. Do I think most of these people carry identification? Probably not. Not a valid ID anyway. So who's going to track all these? First offense, second offense, third offense? And what's going to happen, and this is a question to the lieutenant, because I've been in the position of the sergeant back there. Someone doesn't want to give you a name. Well, I'm not going to tell you who I am. So now under this ordinance, what's your next step, Lieutenant? You go to a location where you have people camped out. You ask for their ID. I don't have an ID. You ask for their name, address, and date of birth so that you can log that this is their first offense and issue them a written warning. How are we going to handle that?
Yeah, I would start by taking their picture. That documents who they were, date and time stamped, and at some point we will get to a real ID. We can certainly circulate or post those pictures within the police department. Oftentimes they've been arrested before, or someone at the police department has some level of familiarity with them. Can't say you're going to get that 100% of the time, but as we work towards dealing with them over and over again at some point, they're probably going to be in a situation where they could be arrestable for trespassing. If it's an area that's posted, we could certainly take action that way. So there are ways to attack it.
So you think we have the resources to be able to take a picture of someone, and we don't know their name and address? Well, they don't have an address. We don't know their name. We don't know their date of birth. And at some point, somebody's going to match that up against some other record that may exist in the police department, and we're going to be able to say, oh, that's who that person is.
I can tell you that happens almost daily, sometimes several times a day, that we get shoplifting, CCTV sort of surveillance photographs, and those get distributed by email within the police department, and we have a very high success rate with someone recognizing them.
But the difference is shoplifting is a much more serious offense. This only carries, what, a $200 fine?
Yes. it does.
Shoplifting can be, depending upon the value of the item that's taken, can result in incarceration. And I'm just trying to point out the resources and the issues that are going to come up the way this ordinance is written. And having been out on the street and coming into contact with people who don't have an ID, and understanding the burden that record keeping is going to place on someone, whether it's the mayor's office, the police department, to track, oh, this is someone's first offense, this is someone's second offense, someone's third offense. I don't know if we've thought that through. And somebody else can comment in a minute if you want, because I'm interested in hearing all this. Let's go to the signage. And I got to tell you, I do love Brockton, and I see everything that's going to have to be printed on the sign. Prior to removing the campsite, the city shall post a notice 24 hours in advance. The notice shall be prominently posted in the immediate area of the tent or campsite and provide a specific date and time by which individuals must remove their property. The notice shall include a statement that any property left at the site may be immediately disposed of, and the notice shall include information including contact numbers and location for agencies that provide a range of shelter, housing services, and report and recovery support services. How big a sign are we going to put up? I mean, seriously.
Well, I mean, I think that notice is not necessarily a sign. It's just a piece of paper that's going to be posted and handed to the person. versus a sign that says no camping or no trespassing.
Well, but this says
So-
post a notice. To me, that
Right,
would
a
not be
notice.
handing something to someone.
Both. I believe that my understanding is both are going to happen.
It doesn't
So-
say that, though,
Yeah,
unless I'm reading the wrong.
So remember,
Written notice.
there's posted notice,
Yeah.
right? And all that's is going to say no camping, and then underneath it, reference the ordinance. And then the actual written notice, the 24-hour notice, is a printed notice that will be left with the campsite.
But the way this is written, it says the notice shall be prominently posted in the immediate area of the tent or campsite and will provide the following information. The notice shall include a statement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is nothing written in this section A that says that we're going to be handing out anything to anyone. And that begs the question that I've always had, Stacy. What if somebody was not there 24 hours prior? We go to a location, we have 5 people that are camped there, and 4 of them received whatever notice we provide. The 5th one just happened to find out, hey, I got some people I know that are camped out up at DW Field Park, and they join that group, but they weren't there for the 24 hours. They never got 24 hours notice. Maybe they were only there for 5 hours. So does that trigger a due process issue for the person who did not have the full 24-hour advance notice? And the reason I'm raising this is it seems to me we've made this such a convoluted and such a mishmash word salad of an ordinance that we're not getting to where we want to be, which is basically you can't camp, tent, sleep on public property. You can't have a campsite there, and if you do, there should be a penalty.
So I think there are 2 parts to it. One is the person who's doing the camping, and the other part is the personal property. And that's more of where you get into the notice, and as you read, it talks about moving the property, whether it gets destroyed, moved, stored. Those are the issues that are dealing with the property. If somebody is merely just sleeping, camping, that's a violation of the ordinance that you don't necessarily need to give that notice about. It's more about taking down the tents. What are you going to do with the tents? What are you going to do with the materials and the camping stuff that the person is using? That's more of where the notice and the due process comes into play.
Okay, so the notice relates to the property and not the conduct of the person.
Right, because as the example that you had given before, the person sleeping on City Hall, if that
Okay.
person is just sleeping on City Hall, they're violating the ordinance, and you go to the enforcement section, and step 1 is that warning. The other thing I wanted to share is my understanding with the community court program is they are also going to help the city with the record keeping and the enforcement and actually issuing the summonses. So once that is set up, that's also going to help the city with the record keeping.
Okay, well, having spent a lot of time in court, and I don't want to get into it tonight, how do you summon someone who has no permanent address?
That was my exact question to the district attorney's office.
And the answer is?
They said that they would take care of it, that it's something that they do, not uncommonly, but
You know,
that we would not have to worry about it.
Right, that's not a city issue, it's a district attorney issue.
So-
Well, it's a city issue in the sense that we're expending a lot of time and effort and I'm sure financial resources on this issue, and I just find it humorous that, oh, don't worry, we'll issue a summons even if we don't have a permanent address for the person, but.
Well, I could try, one of the ideas that was floated in our previous meetings with the DA's office was that there would be a set schedule for the community court, so we know they meet every second and fourth Tuesday, so we can issue that summons on scene and hand it to them. We know the next date is November 1st. You know to show up at court that date. To
All
get
right,
in
so
hand. in the moment.
So let me go back to my original question, is that Jasmine goes out and she encounters 4 or 5 people who are on public property, and they're given a warning that they shouldn't be there. Is it going to be her responsibility to try to obtain the information from those 5 individuals so that that can be recorded as a first offense, so that if those individuals turn up again on public property, it's a second offense, and that triggers a whole new level of response?
My understanding from Jasmine is that's basically what she's doing now.
But she may be doing it, but does she have the authority, Attorney Verdi, to ask people to identify themselves? Does she have the legal authority to go out on public property in Brockton and say to individuals, may I see your identification, or may I have your name and date of birth?
No, and I don't think she needs to do that. But the way that she approaches them is trying to help them, and that they have been cooperative in providing the information she needs to help them. And then she keeps records of that information. So it's not her going out there and saying, give me your name and date of birth. It's a conversation, a helpful conversation that she has with them, forming relationships with them.
But then
That's what she's been doing.
But then how do you keep track of whether it's a first, second, or third offense?
Well, because if she is telling them, you can't be here, there you go, she's keeping track. That's a first offense.
But you, I think you've missed what I'm asking you. She writes down, she goes to a location and a date and time. How does she identify the person to log in a first offense? Does she have the right, as the human services person from the mayor's office, to either demand, request, or require someone identify themselves by name and date of birth? And that's the only way you're going to, I mean, a name is meaningless. You've got to have a name and at least a date of birth to identify someone as to having committed some offense, first offense. And I'm trying to figure out how she's going to do that. Or do we always have to have a police officer go?
I don't think we always, but, I mean, really, I think Jasmine might be better to answer that question than...
All right, let me, I don't want to spend all night here because maybe I'm being too detail-oriented, but on this case, I don't make any apologies for it. Section 5, removal of campsite and public property. Item A, well, there were 2 item A's, and it may be a typo. Any campsite residing on private property is subject to immediate removal. I don't know why that would even be in there. Any campsite residing on private property is subject to immediate removal.
That's just language that had come from, I think, Grant Pass.
Well,
It's not something that needs to be included, but that's why it's in there.
so after Grant Pass,
Yep. The majority of this language is drafted from what the community in Grant Pass had, and the logic of that being that ordinance survived Supreme Court review.
But do we want to say in Brockton, as an ordinance, does the city council want to ordain that any campsite residing on private property is subject to immediate removal?
That's a policy decision.
I understand that, but it's in here, and so I don't think it should remain, but that's just me. Let me go on. There's something else in here that was very interesting. I don't know if I've missed it or not. Oh, I do have, actually, this is just a comment, and Chief Nardelli can correct me if I'm wrong. We always had the right to restrict fires, open fires, correct? I mean, whether we have this ordinance or not, it is unlawful for someone to just start an open fire in the city of Brockton, and we would, what is it, Chapter 148 or something?
Yes.
Chapter 148?
Correct, Chapter 148 of Mass General Laws, correct.
Right, so
No open fires.
that is something that we always...
We have an ordinance on top of that, that you're not allowed to have even a fire pit or any open fire at all in the first fire district, which goes from around Elliott Street, south to around Lawrence Street, west to about Newbury, and east towards Stillman Ave area. Correct.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Here's the last one I'll have for now, then. It's under Section 5, removal of campsite and public property. All personal property, no, strike that. Any campsite in which the individual inhabiting the site has committed a crime under any local, state, or federal law is subject to immediate removal and any other appropriate enforcement action mandated by law. Now, can someone explain to me how anyone other than a sworn police officer is going to be able to go to a campsite and determine that a person on that campsite, inhabiting that site, has committed any local, state, or federal violation unless they have the authority to run a criminal background check?
I mean, I would say that's more visual, right? You come up on a campsite, you see what one would colloquially see as a law violation. They're doing drugs, they're doing, they're committing some other crime.
But that's not how it's written. Obviously, if, Counselor, I agree with you. If someone is committing a crime in the presence of the police, you can certainly take action. But this is basically saying that if someone is inhabiting a site and they have committed, past tense, a crime under any local, state, or federal law, they're subject to immediate removal. And I just don't see why that's in there, and I think it's putting a burden on the mayor's office or the DPW, and it's certainly putting a burden on the police to have to run a warrant check on that person, or a BOP, Board of Probation check, to find out if that person has committed a crime and has been convicted. And I'm just going to close by saying that the reason we're in this position, folks, is because this country and this state has ignored a problem for 35 years. I went to Washington, D.C. back in the 80s, and I was horrified to see outside the State Department people living under cardboard boxes on a grate because the air that's being discharged from that particular building is warmer than the outside air, and that's how those poor people had to live. And here we are 35 years later, and we're expecting the city of Brockton and the little old city council to come up with an ordinance to correct an issue that it's probably global times 10 at this point, because the economy has stricken down people. One of the letters that really got to me that was sent was from a family with children. Fortunately, we don't have that problem. We're fine financially. But this really is a problem, and I think, respectfully, I think we should get together with Jasmine and with others. I think we should tweak this a little bit, but I absolutely think that this council is missing the boat if we don't go to our legislative delegation and we don't demand money for this area, and it should be a regional approach. I said to Jasmine the other day, the selectmen in Stoughton and Whitman and East Bridgewater and West Bridgewater and everywhere else should not sit back in luxury and expect us to take care of people who get off the MBTA and come into the city of Brockton and give us the problems we have. We should convene a meeting, and we should say to all of them, you've got an empty building in your community that might be able to be rehabbed so that we could have additional shelter beds and job training, and maybe have clinicians come in to address addiction and mental health services, which have been ignored too. And by the way, I'm hardly a flaming liberal here. I'm just telling you how I feel, that we have neglected this issue for 35 years, and now we're paying the price for it. And I commend my colleague for filing this, but I don't think it's going to get us where we need to be. I very respectfully don't think it's going to get us where we need to be. I think it's got to be a little bit more targeted. I think it's got to be a little less burdensome for the city putting up signs. I really don't want to have to go into every public park and playground and have a sign saying, you're not allowed to have a campsite here if you're an unhoused person, or however that sign is going to be worded. I mean, I think that's going to be a blight on the city. But I've taken up enough time, and anyone else want to chime in?
Well, I haven't spoke yet, at least as a committee member up here. I would say the blight would, the encampment would be a larger blight than a posted sign. I'm ready. I'm just ready to, I think everybody had an opportunity to speak. If nobody else wants to, I'll make a motion to recommend favorably to full city council.
Second, but on the motion? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to, first of all, agree this needs to be regional. We need to stop letting all these other communities, take advantage of the city, especially when it's their residents. And I would definitely stress that, the homelessness issue is being largely confused with the mental health issue. But my point of information is that the city did have a member of the police department, Lieutenant Linehan, whose job it was to go out to these encampments, to go out to these locations. I spoke with him, not every day, but when an issue arose, it was Lieutenant Linehan that I called. So I don't, and he was in community engagement or education? Community education. So it's a role not entirely unfamiliar to the department, and so it is not impossible to assume that a similar, an officer of a similar status can be designated if that's, I assume what Lieutenant's already, covering. So we have that in place, but that's so I offered my second, but that was on the motion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On the motion?
On the motion, Councilor.
Thank you. It's a very important topic, and it's a good first attempt at an ordinance to address a problem we're having, most especially in the downtown. But I'm not ready to vote positively on this. I think this needs more work. Councilor Farwell suggested maybe we postpone this and have a meeting with Jasmine and others and see what else we can do with this that will satisfy our concerns. So, Councilor Thompson, respectfully, I would like to see you withdraw your motion and instead make a motion to postpone it.
I'm not willing to make that, to remove my motion to recommend favorably. We've had many meetings on this matter with all of the people that are sitting before us today. I don't think we'll ever have a perfect product. I think it would be best to ordain this ordinance. If there are kinks, we can work them out. But there's been a lot of work put into the ordinance before us. There's been many meetings on this ordinance. Not everybody got exactly what they wanted into it, but I believe it's it's a good ordinance, and I'm going to put the matter to a vote.
All right, before we vote, may I just ask of the people who have been kind enough to come here, Commissioner Hill, Chief of Inspections, DePina, and if there's any department head who has been invited that hasn't had a chance to comment and want to stick your neck out, you just feel free to step forward. If not, we'll proceed with a vote. I think it's a wise move. I knew we had some of the most intellectual department heads that any city could have because they all remain seated. Would you call the roll, please?
Yep.
Madam Clerk?
Lally?
Yes.
Texera?
Yes.
Farwell?
No.
Thompson?
Yes.
McCastro?
No.
The vote goes 3-2. It will be reported back favorably.
Reported back favorably. All right, on to number 2, Madam Clerk.
1 second. Item number 2, ordinance. An ordinance prohibiting loitering in public places, to prohibit loitering in public places and to establish violations and penalties. Invited to attend, Jeffrey Thompson, Ward 5 Counselor, Megan Bridges, City Solicitor or her designee, Jasmine Bradser, Director of Social Services, Brenna Perez, Police Chief or her designee.
And Madam Clerk, again, just for the benefit of people who are watching, just summarize briefly the thrust of this ordinance and what it attempts to do.
Yep, this looks to prohibit loitering, which is to remain idle in one location in certain public places, which are identified in there in the ordinance, basically to prevent people from standing in a location that would otherwise prevent normal use of that location, perhaps inside of a doorway, if someone was loitering in front of City Hall, and that would interfere with the public's ability to pass for that. Provides for violations, which can include penalties, which is $50 each day, could be a different one, and it also allows to be brought for criminal as well.
All right, Councilor Thompson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the Ordinance Committee. Like the previous ordinance, this ordinance is not targeting people, it is targeting behavior. This ordinance looks to prevent the obstruction of a public roadway or sidewalk, or hinder or prevent someone from attempting to pass thereon. The scope of this ordinance includes entrances to businesses, parking garages, transportation terminals, schools, and unoccupied buildings. Note that this ordinance does not include public parks. Now, the city of Brockton has been having an issue with dozens of people congregating under our bridges with no purpose being there, blocking passage and inhibiting the safe travel through these areas. This problem is also prevalent along the railroad retaining wall. This ordinance will assist the Brockton PD in addressing the issue of large gatherings in our public walkways or our public travel ways with people who have no business being there and are congregating there essentially for hours at a time and blocking passage of these walkways. So it's narrowly tailored to the issue of blocking and congregating with no purpose in our public walkways and pathways. And therefore, I ask that this committee vote in favor of this ordinance. Thank you.
Councilor, anything? I have a question for Attorney Verdi if no one has... Under violations and penalties, it says no person shall be arrested. I should have asked you this about the prior ordinance, but this would not be an arrestable offense anyway, would it?
To be honest, I have not seen the latest version of this ordinance. So
if it were a disturbance of the peace, I would think that yes, then it would be arrestable. But if somebody is just loafing and loitering, I'm wondering if that would rise to the level of an arrestable offense.
it shouldn't. There is case law that basically has found that arresting somebody for loitering is unconstitutional. And in those cases, the people loitering were actually gang members with criminal records, and still the court found that arresting them for just loitering was unconstitutional.
Okay, and then I had one, I can't get the police out of me, I guess. It says, any person who violates no, strike that. No person shall be arrested for a violation of this chapter unless the arresting officer or by direct demand first affords such person an opportunity to cease or explain such conduct. So I come along Main Street, somebody is loafing or loitering in a doorway, you'd have to ask them to explain their conduct, and I'm just wondering if you don't get into a he said, or he said, she said situation that, well, I never got a chance to explain myself. Well, this is my explanation, and the officer wouldn't take it. And I'm wondering if we're building in a step in the process here that perhaps we don't have to. I've just never seen that before in any statute that would bring you into court, is you give someone a chance to explain, well, this is why I'm doing this.
I agree with you. I'm not too sure how that would play out as far as what kind of explanation.
All right, I think Attorney
Would be
Resnick
sufficient.
raised her hand, so we may have.
So I was asked to draft up a loitering ordinance. This one comes directly from Springfield. They have identified, the only difference in the Springfield ordinance is they have problems that I wasn't asked to address. So you'll see what those problems are. So that language is specifically in the Springfield ordinance. It was the only city that I could find that had a loitering ordinance. The state has a single loitering ordinance, or state statute, and it's limited to, I believe, like the MBTA kind of train locations. But that's where that language came from. That part of it was challenged in a case, and it was kind of determined, at least in that court, to be okay. But that's really the scope of where that language comes from, Springfield.
I would point out, I think the Department of Justice just either took over the Springfield Police Department or imposed some restrictions on them, if I'm right. By the way, the reason I'm raising this is, what I don't want to do is put the police in a position where we off the people that we are here to sworn and protect. In other words, sometimes by going this route, we set up an adversarial relationship, especially with young people, if they feel they're being rousted about standing around and this and that. And I just want to make sure we don't do that, that's all. But that's all I have. Anyone else? Councilor Nicastro.
Thank you. Attorney Verde, in the first section of this, public place, the definition of a public place includes a plaza or a park, okay? So it would seem that a park is considered a public place. And the title, of course, is Ordinance Prohibiting Loitering in Public Places. Now, I see down below in the prohibited conduct that we kind of, in each enumerated section, we kind of say where the conduct is. But yet, isn't it kind of a conflict or unclear if a park is a public place?
Sure, you can delete that. I mean, the purpose is that the scope should be to limit the time, place, and manner. But, yeah.
Or shouldn't there be something that specifically says parks are accepted out of this? Because
Yeah, you could include that, like very specifically, the definition does not include
parks.
public parks.
Yeah, it was, I'll tell you, it was not our intent to include parks as public places. So if that was left in, I don't know if that's in the final draft. It is?
Yep.
In our discussions, it was our public parks were never meant to be included.
Okay.
So I would definitely.
What about plazas?
What is a plaza being that's a private?
That, again, that language came from Springfield. Even then, I think in that, they had certain parts of Springfield, and I just deleted it because I knew that really wasn't within the city. So you can just delete it. But oftentimes, when you're looking to start an ordinance and to start a draft, you check to see what other communities have. Our Muni Code, which is your searchable ordinances, actually allows you to look at their database for loitering examples. So you can just craft it to how it works for your city.
Okay. Thank you.
Then,
Anyone else?
yeah, I mean, I'd make a motion to amend, just so that we can,
Take that out, parks.
yeah, take that part up.
Park or
It's
park
2
and
words.
plaza?
So I'd make a motion to amend to strike the words park and strike the word plazas under the definition of public place.
Second.
You want to call the roll or make a vote?
I didn't hear a second, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that is.
Second.
Oh, I'm,
Jack
okay.
seconded it.
Okay, the amendment has been offered, and it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? All those opposed? It is a vote. One last question, Counselor, well, actually, Counselor Thompson, you're an attorney. Explain to me what is loafing? What is, what?
I did Google it. I'll get you the answer. Because I almost deleted it.
Okay.
It actually means to spend time in an idle state. It's another way of just saying you're idling.
Some people say politicians do that. I
Yeah.
don't know.
But I had to look it up.
Okay, to spend time in an idle state. All right. So is there a motion to recommend favorably?
Motion to recommend favorably,
As amended?
as amended.
And on the motion, anyone else?
On the motion,
On the motion.
I would like,
Second for the purposes of on the motion.
thank you, I would like to know what Ms. Bratcher thinks of this
Oh,
and get her thoughts on it.
I think as long as we're eliminating the portion about parks, just because that's really the only place we can send people during the day other than for the library, I'm content with the changes that were made to this one. I talked to Attorney Verde in great detail about a lot of what came up for both of these. Where this isn't really something people can be criminalized for. It's not something that I have a hard time with. I also get many calls on a regular basis from businesses in the area, kind of asking if I can go talk to people and gently move them along so that they don't have to call the police department. So this is something I'm comfortable with, especially with that change, so.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, anyone else? If not, would the clerk call the roll?
Yes. Lally?
Yes.
Texera?
Yes.
Farwell?
Yes.
Thompson?
Yes.
Nacastro?
Yes.
It's 5 in the affirmative.
Recommended favorably. I believe that is it, am I correct?
Correct.
That's correct.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming and listening, and all those who contributed to the discussion. I think that's very important when we address public policy issues, to get as many viewpoints as we can. So I thank you all, and with that, motion to adjourn, please.
Motion to adjourn.
Moved and second, all in favor? All opposed? We are adjourned.